Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining today. Us here in the theater, this is our third design speech. We have three great guests today with us, and I think you're gonna love the session. Today we decided to talk about design and leadership. I mean, now and more and more every day, you have creative and designers reaching executive levels in companies at the C-suite level. They're going to be our clients, they're going to be our partners, and also maybe they will be our competitors in the future. So the idea is to understand this shift in the current economy and see how we can engage with this new type of executives. Just so you know, today, apart from the people that are in the room and are zooming from different offices, we have our people, some students joining us through Zoom. This is going to be broadcasted to Syracuse University, Miami Art School, Brigham, University of Alabama, University of Colorado Boulder, SMU, FIT, Temple, BCU, Sam Fox, Queens College, and Michigan State. All schools and classes from those colleges are zooming in into this speech. So I would like to introduce and talk briefly about our guest today, Maria Giudice. That's how it's probably said, no? The way I said it is Maria Giudice. It's from the Italian background. So Maria, in 1997, she founded Hot Studio, an experienced design firm that grew into a full-service creative agency with Fortune 500 clients and an abundance of awards. When Facebook acquired the company in 2013, Maria stayed on as Director of Product Design until 2015, when she joined Autodesk as VP of Design. She's a TED speaker and author of various books, and her last one is right now in the bookshelves. It's called The Rise of the DEO, the Design Executive Officer. I guess that's what DEO means. Judy is the co-founder of Word & Company, a leading international executive search firm specializing in design for top-tier startups and Fortune 500 corps. Judy grew up in Minneapolis and holds a BFA in graphic design from the University of Michigan. She guides and coaches a myriad of leaders and companies in an ever-changing business landscape and working with a range of CEOs, founders, and thought leaders in recruiting and scouting for design talent. And Lauren Cramsey is the global CMO of Ogilvy. She is responsible for the direction and reputation of our agency, and she's currently designing and leading Ogilvy's global transformation into a modern and high-quality marketer. And she has been appointed to Ogilvy's worldwide board in 2016. So welcome the three of you today. And today what we're going to do is we're going to invite Maria, and she's going to give us a speech about design and leadership for around 20-25 minutes, and then the three of them will join the stage for a panel discussion. So Maria, please, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to sit here and chill out. That's okay. Thanks for joining today. So I thought what I'd do is just quickly, I don't know if many of you have heard my history. I thought I'd tell you a brief story about kind of how where I started and where I have recently landed. And then talk about this idea of these unique characteristics that make up the DEO, the Design Executive Leader, and why that special leader is so important in today's world. So, oh great, dig the graphics, nice. Okay, so I started out, first of all, I'm from New York originally. I live in California, but my heart is still in New York. And as long as I could remember, as a kid, I wanted to be a famous artist. That was my destiny. I grew up in Staten Island, and at a very young age, I was an amazing entrepreneur. So my mother taught cooking lessons in the basement of our house in Staten Island. And on the walls of the basement, they were covered with these paintings that her young daughter would do, like 12, 13, 15, on like really hideous canvas boards, almost like glued to the wall. The wall was like wood panel. Anyway, so she had her students, and her students would look at these, really these paintings from a young girl. And one of her students said, "Hey, your daughter's a pretty good artist. Can she do commissions?" And I'm like 13, 15. And of course, my mother's like, "Sure, yes." And so my very first commission was to paint dog portraits for $35 on canvas board. And then I quickly moved up as I went to high school to paint jean jackets for $100 a pop, which was incredibly expensive at the time. So I was very good at pricing. And I would actually paint these jean jackets while babysitting, essentially doubling my hourly rate. So I didn't know it at the time, but I was a very, very smart businesswoman. And then I went to Cooper Union for art. And that's where I turned from painter to graphic design. Came out of Cooper Union. I worked for a man named Richard Saul Werman, designing guidebooks. And then he got the gig to redesign the Pacific Bell Yellow Pages. So I accidentally moved to California. But it took me 3 years to give up my apartment on First Avenue and 7th Street. For the New Yorkers here, you don't give up an apartment. And then I worked on the Yellow Pages, and then I went for a couple of years, and then I started freelancing. And while I was freelancing, I accidentally founded a company because I was just getting busy. So I was freelance, I get busy. What do you do when you freelance? You hire your friends. Next thing you know, you have 5 people working for you, 10 people working for you. You have a company. And then you have to figure it out as you go. And so I grew this company, Hot Studio, to be, over a 15, 20-year period, to grow to about 100 people. I had an office in New York and in San Francisco. And then in 2013, I sold that company to Facebook, where I was a director of product design. And then while I was at Facebook, I got recruited to be the vice president of experience design at Autodesk, where I worked for the last 2.5 years as a change agent. So while I was at Cooper Union, while I was at running Hot Studio, I was asked to give a TEDx talk. And I don't know, I was like, I don't do anything special. What am I going to talk about? As one would have that impression when you're doing being asked to do a TEDx talk. And I was like, I don't do anything special. And then this woman said to me, "Maria, are you kidding me? You do everything differently." I was a CEO of a company, but I never had formal training in business. I just treat every problem as a design problem. So my design problem was becoming a CEO. And she said, "You know what you are? You're not a CEO, you're a DEO." So thus came with this idea of this design executive officer. And so I didn't realize at the time that I was really leading companies any differently than a traditional CEO who went to business school would do. So then I started doing some research about this, like, are there others like me out there? And I started really studying, traditional CEOs that I really admired, that seemed to be doing things very differently. And from that research, I identified very unique characteristics that these leaders had that seemed unique to what a traditional CEO would be. So I'm going to remember them now. And how I remember them, so you could remember them, is the word crisping. So there are these 6 characteristics that these special leaders possess that are very, very different than traditional CEOs. The very first one is change agent. The DEO looks at change as sort of an ingredient in their work. Traditional CEOs hate change. Change equals risk. Change equals uncertainty. CEOs are bred to be very, very certain. CEOs are bred to create a plan and execute a plan. DEOs love change. They run into change with incredible excitement and enthusiasm. And that's how they lead. They are very comfortable with the uncertainty and the chaos that comes with change. The second characteristic is risk-taking. So as I mentioned, traditional CEOs, their whole job is to report to the board and mitigate risk, identify risk and mitigate it, right? And, but DEOs are huge risk takers. Now, they are smart enough to realize what risks are worth taking and what risks aren't worth taking. So instead, you know, they can take enough risks where they won't like lose control of the company or lose money. They figure out how to take smart risks and identify sort of like, what's the worst thing that can happen? If I could live with the worst thing that can happen, I'm going to take that risk. So they are very comfortable using risk, again, as an ingredient to be a strong leader. The third characteristic is intuition. So if any of you have worked in large organizations, and I have, and I continue to do consulting for startups, everybody is always by the numbers. Can you prove that? Show me the numbers. Can you justify that? And you know, almost as if nobody is going to make a decision unless the data says that I can make that decision. Now, DEOs they live in this world of analytics and intuition, or imagination and metrics. So they make decisions, they look at the data, but they trust their gut. They look at it and they have a lever where they can, if they feel something, if they use their emotions and they feel like it's the right decision, they're gonna trust their gut a lot more than what traditional CEOs do, which is highly, highly metric-based. And as we know, as a group of designers, sometimes it's really hard to justify the work solely through metrics. Sometimes it's very hard to measure human emotion, especially over a long period of time. So that's the third one. The next one is systems thinking. So CEOs are very, very linear. They, you know, have a vision, they identify a plan, and they stay on the path and they execute the plan in a very, very linear fashion. Designers and leaders, good leaders, realize, especially in a globally interconnected world, we need to be thinking in terms of systems. We are facing the most complex issues of our generation when it comes to technology, when it comes to politics, when it comes to globalization. There's all of these issues that are so, so large in nature. And you can't solve them by following a plan. You have to think of everything as an ecosystem. And you have to understand that a decision that you make on one piece of the system will have an impact on another piece of the system. So rather than thinking, I would say, rather than thinking like this, you kind of have to think like this. And that's what it's important, is that the CEOs can understand the long term and execute the short term at the same time through the lens of systems thinking. The next attribute is people-centeredness, another really, really important trait for designers. So, you know, high emotional intelligence, understanding authenticity, understanding trust, understanding the impact of your decisions on actual human beings. And in the traditional CEO world, in a world prior to where technology hasn't been so, you know, pervasive in our culture, it was really easy to separate your customers from your employees. You know, there was a huge wall between, you know, what you did inside a company, what you said about yourselves, what the actions you took, and the interaction with your customers on the outside. And as you know, in a world that is incredibly globally connected, there is really no difference, no wall between what you're doing inside your company and how you reach your customers. And the way you behave as a culture inside your company has a direct impact on your customers, because customers are now shopping with their values more and more. They're not, name brands are important, but as you can see from the recent Facebook issue, trust is a big, big issue. And it will become an even bigger issue as we move forward, as people start understanding the implications of how data, personal data, is used to influence product and service experiences. So being a person who cares about your employees, your community outside, and your customers, this CEO, this DEO character looks at that lens very holistically. And then, so we got CRISP, CRISP. So there's one more characteristic that DEOs possess, and it's what I call GSD. Does anybody know what GSD means? Absolutely, get shit done. That is the next part, the very last attribute. So DEOs don't get stuck in vision land. Vision is incredibly important, but they know how to execute against a vision. So when you think about these characteristics, being a change agent, risk taker, intuition, systems thinking, people-centeredness, and get shit done, what do those qualities remind you of? Designers. This is what we learned in art school. This is what we learned to be an effective designer. All of those qualities are designer qualities. And now those qualities are important at the C level. So that's why this, and this is a book that I wrote several years ago, where it was a relatively odd idea that a designer can be at the C level. That somebody who didn't get an MBA could actually lead a company. And when you think about the DEO, you don't have to go to design school to be DEO. You just have to embody these attributes. DEOs exist in government, they exist in business, they get in technology companies, they are political figures. I think one of my favorite DEOs, I have two favorite DEOs, which I'll share with you today. One is Pope Francis, who I like to affectionately call Pope Frank, right? I'm not religious at all, even though I grew up Catholic. I'm not religious, and I'm usually very skeptical about any kind of religious figures whatsoever in life. But here's a guy, for, I don't know, hundreds of years, I don't know, thousands of years, there's been popes, and this guy becomes a pope, and then he starts doing everything the opposite of what traditional popes do, right? He cares about the poor. He treats them with, deep respect. He sees no hierarchy between people who are in the Vatican and the people and poor people. He is changing policies that have never been changed. And he talks about systems thinking all the time. So it's a perfect example, Pope Francis, great DEO. Now, the other one, controversial, but I'm in New York, so I'm gonna share that with you, is Howard Stern. I love Howard Stern. I know now you guys are like gonna leave the room, but grew up in New York. So Howard Stern, this is a radio guy who always said what he thought. The thing I loved about Howard Stern, I have learned a lot from listening to Howard Stern. He says what he thinks. He has integrity, he has authenticity. Now he's been outrageous, and he might have said some things that were really bad, especially towards women back in the day. But he has grown, and when he does interviews, he treats everybody equally. He could interview a hooker, and he can interview Carmen Diaz, treat them exactly the same way. And then he left traditional radio and took a chance on Sirius satellite radio. So, two people who weren't trained as designers, and then you have Malala, and you have Elon Musk. There you have Michelle Obama, you have Obama. There's like amazing examples of people out there who are embodying these attributes every day and being incredible leaders. So the last thing I'll say is, like, why now? Why is this happening? There's a couple of reasons. First of all, businesses have, old businesses. Like, how many years has Ogilvy been around? 70 years. there have been businesses that have been around for 70 years. It is pretty unheard of now for businesses to have that kind of longevity. The average lifespan of businesses went from an average of 75 years to 15 years. People in companies are spending 2 years inside companies and moving to the other. You don't have to have incredible loyalty for companies anymore. Design leadership, there are evidences of people who went to art school who are now design leaders. And there's a fund from Google that was tracked for the last 10 years. They called it the UX Fund through the DMI. And they tracked the 10 companies that they defined as people-centeredness, and they have outperformed the S&P by over 200%. So this idea of design leading products is here now. People are now associating the fact that if your product doesn't work, functioning, we were just happy when the thing worked 5 years ago. Now, if it doesn't match my values, if the company's not being authentic, if the experience of the product or service isn't good, there is zero loyalty. There's zero loyalty for people to stick with products, and there's zero loyalty for employees to stay in companies. So these attributes are required in order for businesses to be successful moving forward. And then, of course, in 2011, there was an IBM study that on the top CEOs, I think they interviewed the top current CEOs, and they said that creativity was the #1 characteristic for leaders of the future. So there's all of this momentum where designers or people who think like designers, act like designers, and feel like designers can be incredible CEOs for our products and services for the future. Did I do okay? Should we end there so other people can get on stage?
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks.
So now I would like to invite Lauren and Jude to the stage, and so we can have the panel and the discussion.
Maria could have painted my denim jacket for
Yeah.
today.
Might be a little bit more than $100 now, though.
Well, I mean, $100 is a lot for me right now. So when you said it was a lot back then, I'm like, it's a lot right now too. First of all, I think you answered like 80% of my questions that I had on these cards.
We're done.
We might be able to go straight to the audience Q&A. But I think what's most interesting to me about what you said is, I was laughing with my colleague Nellie over there when you said, "Oh, what do all these traits have in common?" The first thing that came to my head was women. And then you said designer, but then you mentioned 2 of your favorites who just happened to be men. And I also think it's interesting that this is an all-women panel, one of my first in quite some time. So,
We're saying we're going to channel Destiny's Child.
Yes.
Now, I insist on being Beyonce, so that's why I'm sitting in the middle.
Judy and I didn't figure out who's Michelle and who's Kelly.
Yeah, you're going to have to figure that out.
We can figure that out over lunch.
Yes.
But I just wonder how, and Judy, for you as well, as you do various amounts of recruiting for all different types of companies, how much does this profile tend to be more female than male?
I would say it's gender agnostic.
Okay.
Truthfully,
yeah.
I mean, great leaders are great leaders. I think we have to. I actually have to think. I think we should stop thinking about is it male, female, but are the companies supportive of both genders for leadership in general?
Yeah.
That's how I think of it.
Do you think it's generational at all? In terms of how these types of leaders, how you're seeing these types of leaders across different generations, so boomers compared to Gen X compared to millennials?
I'm not sure I understand the
question. Are you seeing them across all generations?
I would say that the generations that are growing up where design is becoming much more important, and that's been part of their conversation, and they're fluent in design thinking. they're going to become a DEO.
Because it was interesting, Maria, when you were talking about the traditional CEO compared to the DEO. And when we think about the traditional CEO, there's so much pressure to do everything that you discussed, whether it be the risk mitigation, the short-termism, and that pressure, doesn't just come from the board. It comes in many cases from the shareholders.
Right.
And when you have those large ecosystems of people just waiting for you to give them exactly what they want, risk-free, it's really hard to infuse a new type of thinking. And the other question I had is, how much of this is about, in these organizations, how much of it is about behavior change? And do you use design principles to get to that behavior change?
Yeah, and behavior change is hard and long. So so it is a challenge because CEOs they're kind of wired to be short-term thinkers because they have to report to shareholders and board members, right? And they put a lot of pressure on growth. Got to keep growing, right? But doesn't make great products. So if you're only short-term thinking, you're not thinking about the implication of the system or on the long-term implication, you're not going to grow to be one of those great companies because you're not going to have the quality and you're not going to really understand the implications of long-term success. In terms of behavior change, so that's one of the things reason why I left Facebook to join Autodesk was because Autodesk was, is a 36-year-old company. So Ogilvy is 70, but so you could probably understand that to make cultural change happen in companies that are quite old, it's really, really hard because it's kind of baked into their DNA.
But they're asking for it now.
They're asking for it.
I mean, organizations with deep legacy issues where design was not at the core of their thinking, and then the more progressive company where, like an Airbnb where the founders are design-led, everyone's asking for it. It's just a question of how they integrate these people into the organization, how they penetrate across the different disciplines from accounting to marketing to engineering. And I think there are changes. There are changes that are really happening now because design has a seat at the table. It's not an option anymore not to have that.
But like you were saying around, everybody I feel like is asking for it. Everybody's like, oh, I want that design thing. Check the box. But they don't really know what they're signing up for.
They don't. And, we recently were involved with a building of a lab for a global French luxury company. There are only a few, you could probably guess. And they wanted to build an innovation lab based in Brooklyn, away from corporate headquarters. And it was an interesting process because while they had this vision, they knew that they needed to bring new design thinking into the organization. They were smart enough to know that it needed to be off-site to sort of incubate these possibilities. You still had to work with the mothership who had, it was new to them. They didn't know, even from an HR process, how to interview someone like this. So there was a lot of training that we had to do to get them to understand these are the behaviors of this kind of individual, all the behaviors that Maria talked about, and to take a stab, to take a bold leap into this unknown of what does design mean and what does innovation mean within an organization that hasn't had to think that way before.
How much does it hurt the organizations, this one in particular, to silo, if you will, that innovation lab in Brooklyn?
I think we talked a lot about that when we were setting it up. You have to bring in from the mothership visitation rights, but you also had to have some sort of doctrine of independence in order to have the freedom initially. Now, long term, I don't think it can work if they remain independent, but to incubate some ideas with some sense of freedom without all the constraints that exist in an organization that has its way, I think it has to be off-site for a little bit, but not indefinitely, for sure.
Yeah, I say the thing about being a change agent, and I'm actually been doing a lot of speaking about this now because of the lessons of being inside Autodesk as a change agent, the good, bad, and ugly. Mm-hmm. It's so important to have executive sponsorship and a runway because it's a relatively, design leadership is new to organizations. People, peers and above really don't know how to behave or interact with these new types of leaders. They're not used to sharing the power with designers.
Right.
So you have to have a runway, as you said, and sponsorship.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of where digital was, 30 years ago or whatever it's been, where do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? Oh, now digital is everything, so we don't even need to use the word digital. Let's ban it from our vocabulary. It feels like design as a word is on that similar cusp where potentially, 10 years from now, you don't even necessarily need a DEO because a CEO is a DEO. So
right.
it's sort of this, the parallels I think are very interesting between the two. At the same time, there's so many clients that we work with that are still going through digital transformation themselves, still ask in a proposal, in an RFP, we need an agency that can help us with digital transformation, and you just sort of want to, bang your head against the wall. But it's kind of scary to think how long it might take. At least they're asking, but it's kind of scary to think how long it might take to get to here, because even as you were talking about the DEO, I'm sort of sitting there like, wait, how do CEOs that don't have this type of thinking surviving?
Well, there's hopefully the good ones are surrounding themselves by these divergent thinkers who are bringing fresh inspiration into how you do things and do it differently.
Yeah, but by definition, even of those traits, they have to be sort of people centric, know what they don't know,
yes.
have that intuition to bring in those people, and then the question is, how do you bring those people in and really let them infuse the organization? And I think that's what a lot of companies struggle with, is they know they want the shiny new object, but
right.
they're only going to give the shiny, this much room to do these things.
Yes.
And how do you really get them to just infect the whole organization?
You need to set up Nest cameras everywhere in every room. So
you might, but I think this is something that, in some ways it's easier for product companies to turn the corner because they actually understand what they're making and they understand their capital. With a company like Ogilvy and, service companies, our capital is our people and our talent.
Yeah.
Which,
right.
which translate to our ideas. And I think that's where the tension between the risk and how much can we just keep things going as they've been and how much do we have to disrupt or change becomes harder.
I would argue that talent is everything. Whether you're in an agency or a product, because you're only as good as the people that you have, right?
Absolutely.
And so,
talent is the currency.
It's the currency, right? Especially if you're trying to do groundbreaking work. Well, I could tell you what I did when I joined Autodesk. And again, I've had great successes and I had a lot of bumps in the road, but I feel really good.
How long have you been there now?
I'm no longer there. I left I left last month. So I'm a free agent looking for a job. Not really, not looking for a job, But so I was, when I was at Facebook, I was recruited, a recruiter called me. And I said, I'm getting a 4-year earnout. There is no way I'm leaving Facebook. And there's no way you can afford me. Thank you. Recruiters love to hear that. No, it's a big challenge. So I said, okay, well, they love that challenge. So I said, but I know a lot of people. I'm happy to make recommendations if you could tell me who the company is. So they said, it's Autodesk. I went, oh, I love Autodesk. They were my clients. Facebook was a client of Hot Studios, and Autodesk was a client of Hot Studio. I said, I love the CEO, Carl Bass. He's authentic, he's honest, he's a great guy. I'm happy to give you a bunch of names. And the recruiter said, well, can you meet the guy who's looking for a design leader? He's having trouble finding the right fit. It's been looking like 6 months. Very hard to find really good design leaders. That Judy can kind of talk about the process because it's fascinating. And I said, okay, his name is Amar. I said, I'll meet Amar in a bar. So I did. And, I went and met with him, and he was telling me how, he's been working at the company for 30 years. And, in order for Autodesk to really, become a modern company, he needed to find a very strong design leader who's going to help change the culture, which of course is crack cocaine for people like me. Mm-hmm. And I said, so I joined the company, and then I get there and they're like, so what are you going to do? I'm like, I have no idea. So what do? You treat every problem like a design problem. And I did my research and discovery. So I said, give me 90 days and I'll give you a plan at the end of it. So I used those 90 days. I traveled all over. It was a global company. I traveled all over the world. I sat in kitchens. I interviewed people above me, my peers below me, and interns. I interviewed as many people as I possibly could. I think it was well over 300 people. And I asked them, in my interviews, I asked them 5 questions mostly. Tell me your story. What are your hopes and dreams? Oh, no. Tell me your story. Why are you here? Because I was suspicious. Like, some people have been working at the company for like 10 years, and I'm thinking, what, you're afraid to get another job? But no, they love the company. What are hopes and dreams? What is getting in your way, and how I can help? Mm-hmm. And I collected all this data, and then in 90 days, I came up and I presented to my peers and above what my mission is at Autodesk. And I came up with 4 pillars. Build a strong design community. So in this context, it's not just unionizing and globalizing the 400 designers worldwide. It was like to change the perception. If you are in a product company, just like here, you're in an agency, regardless of your job title, you are designing. So you're all designers. Yep. And then the second one was focusing on customers, creating customer-centric programs, especially in product companies. It's shocking how few people who work on product actually interact directly with customers, which is like, you're designing products and you never talk to a customer. We got to change that. Yeah. So coming up with programs around that. The third one was connecting experiences. So Autodesk had 120 products in their portfolio, mostly through acquisition. And the products didn't look the same. They didn't feel the same. They were being redundant in terms of patterns. So how do you find those things that should be united across the ecosystem? And then the very fourth one was ship quality. So, a lot of product companies suffer from the minimum viable product syndrome, which means that it really means minimum product, and it's not necessarily a good thing. So how do you change people's perspective and give them criteria for a product and tell them when it's good enough to ship? So I did these 4, I socialized them, got the thumbs up, and then for the last 2.5 years, I created programs to answer those 4 things. So if you're gonna be a change maker, you have to make your strategy very tangible, because, and also impactful, and tie those goals to other leaders in the company's goals, what their goals are. And
so that's a shared agenda.
You have to, because if you actually are, like you were saying, like in an innovation chamber, or you are creating a change agenda that people don't feel like is mutually beneficial, they'll reject you. And they will do everything to make your life hell.
Yeah. Judy, Maria brought up the process of recruiting in this world, and we talked a little bit before we started about how much it's changed since you first started your company and
Right.
where it's at now. Can you just talk a little bit about how it's changed and what the process is on a day?
When we started Working Company in 1995, and our focus was always about design, and design being integral to business success. That was our tagline in 95. So we had a vision that design was really important, and we were going to fight for it. But design back then, much of it was communication design, and digital was just starting. In fact, our first client was the Walt Disney Company, and we staffed the Disney Online effort, I don't know, it was 30 plus positions in 6 months. And it was intense because no one knew where was this person coming from? Were they coming from television? Were they coming from software? Were they coming from content? And that kind of that was like the beginning of sort of these intersecting disciplines coming together to form this new digital realm. Now, we talked a little bit about our database, which has over 100,000 people that we've, I'm afraid to say, talked to over the last 20 some years. And we've developed a keyword system. And those keywords have really shifted over these years from graphic design to human factors to information architecture to interaction design to consumer experiences to design officer to service design to board of directors and VCs. Designers are becoming venture capitalists. Designers are becoming board of directors. We've seen this continuum and had really the privilege to watch these designers over time really take their place in the industry and make a difference. So design is no longer it's no longer about beauty. It's not enough. Design has to impact business, and now it needs to participate in the global conversation around education, around public health, around government, around sustainability, around social innovation. Actually, you're probably familiar with the Audacious project that TED has just launched, and this is about all different kinds of people coming together to innovate against very real big systemic problems. So designers now today have a responsibility to participate in the conversation of making the world a better place to live.
And it's interesting because it's sort of the genesis of it when you think about the people that first developed the, trains and highways and cars and how people looked at cities and how cities were to be built. I mean, that always fell on the role of a designer, someone that could actually design the way that people would interact with what they needed in the world.
What's happening is almost the reverse to, at least from my vantage point. For instance, we've been working with a distributed company, 100% distributed workforce, and very design-led, engineering design-led. And they needed to scale and think about how they were going to scale globally. And fast forward to the person that we represented there, it's not public yet, but this person basically scaled, was a 4-star general. And they understood how to deploy teams. And so here we are, we have an army, a general from the United States Army who's now bringing her wisdom into a design organization. So there is this fluidity of conversation that's happening now, and it's vital for the future.
That's so
and
great.
It's so cool to watch that continuum really change, and who knows what it's going to be in 10 years when I'm 70.
What was the, what was the, I was going to say when you're 30, what was the, Maria talked a little bit about her moments of first liking art and painting dogs for $30. What was your first moment of understanding that design was going to be the future of business?
Well, I started my design career doing calligraphy for bar and bat mitzvah invitations. So I was quite sure at age 13. I was making money too at age 13.
I did calligraphy as well. Yeah.
So that was my lead into type design, but I'm not sure that answered your question.
No, it did. I just wanted to know what got you first.
There was two things. One was that, and the other was I had a love for fabric and textile and pattern. And to this day, I sort of feel like I'm a pattern observer, but now through people's stories and trying to make those connections. But, type led me into design, and then people's story. Actually, my mom used to say, that I was a super nosy kid, and I would be like, why did you ask that question? Or why are you wearing that? Or how much are you making? So now I have a forum with, I'm allowed to ask those questions.
I was going to say, that might have been what led to the calligraphy of bar mitzvahs. Where's that bar mitzvah? Oh, I'm just going to do the calligraphy.
No, I think the calligraphy came first.
Yeah.
Should we open it up for some questions? Someone always has to go first.
Or we can call
Or you have
on
no
somebody.
questions.
We can call on somebody.
Someone. Oh, I think Mirko, do we have any questions from?
I mean, I posted it on Slido as well.
You can ask it in
Yeah,
person.
you don't have to read it. You don't have to read
Yeah.
it verbatim.
All right. Hi. I think Maria mentioned this in her first talk, basically that good design is a result of consumers and users demanding better experience, more authenticity, etc. So my question is basically a little bit tied to the fact that organizational design leadership is a slow adapter.
Yeah.
And how can we help employees demand better experiences in the workforce, in the company, to basically expel?
Maybe you can answer that question about, like, because you're in the talent business, and and keeping good people requires working in a good company.
Yeah, I mean, I think companies need to take care of their people and train them and train different groups within the organization to speak to one another and to bring a level of empathy to every conversation so that people can hear and listen and truly listen in an authentic way.
Yeah, people don't leave companies, they leave their bosses. And bosses can increase the risk of people having strokes by 33%. If you have a really bad boss.
Is that true? Is that a real percentage?
Yes, it's a real percentage. I didn't make it up. It's if you want to keep good people, you're going to have good bosses, and they're going to have to be empathetic. But org design is really slow. But the interesting thing about org design is, as there's these new types of leaders rising up, they don't fit into an org. And like I joined Autodesk, I didn't fit into any org because orgs were designed in these silos. They were based on these product owners. And I worked across the company. So you have to rethink product org design if you're going to bring leaders in like that.
I think there needs to always be some sort of centralized design nucleus for every organization, because designers and creative people need a community in which to connect with and feel part of. But I believe one day designers are going to live in every single department, from accounting to marketing to financial services. Designers are by nature expansive thinkers, and every discipline within every company needs that mindset, and eventually those boundaries, those silos are going to break down.
Absolutely.
And the departments are going to be called something entirely different.
Right. You can't just have, there's a great book called Org Design for Org Design.
That's creative.
Is it, Design Orgs for Design Org Design for Design Orgs. Org Design for Design Orgs. It's a great book, and it shows you 3 different types of models for how design can fit into these companies, and the trade-offs for each one.
To that point, I think starting in education, the educational system is going to shift too. I mean, as we see, my friend Jessica Halfand, who teaches with Michael Beirut at the Yale School of Business, they're teaching design, but in the business school. And we've now got business being taught in the design school, if you think about Stanford Design. So the model for breeding this new generation of a creative thinking organization has to start in the education. And so education is just going to be a very different kind of interdisciplinary programming that's going to be required. And we all need to invent that too.
Can we, I know there's another question, but I really want to talk about diversity and the diversity problem, just because this is my recent passion, is, working in tech, working in Silicon Valley, and being inside Facebook. When I joined Facebook, I was 50, and the average age of Facebook, including the CEO, was 25. And majority of people were white little boys, designing products at global proportions. What is wrong with this picture, right? So and our products are increasingly global products, and they have implications and they have consequences. And sometimes those consequences can be the difference between life and death. And so it is super, super important for us to all be committed to having, gender balance and diversity when it comes to ethnicity, sexuality, age, because when you have a diverse population, it just makes the products better, because the empathy is more diversified. So I've been working with this nonprofit called Interact Project that is small but mighty, and we're hoping to bring it to global scale, which provides free design services to kids in underserved communities. Because when I went to art school, I had I went to public school my whole life. I had art classes. I was exposed to art. In public school now, these kids don't get exposed to art at all. They have no idea that they can be leveraging their creativity for a career. And designers make a ton of money, as Judy will attest right now, and in certain locations. And we need to expose kids to these careers in design so that they can have a pathway and fill the pipeline. Because right now, there's still, in art school, there's 2% African American and about 12% Latino. And everybody is going after those people. All the big corporations are trying to diversify with a tiny group of people. So we have to create a pipeline to drive more diverse designers so that they can have careers and that we can have better products and services.
That was just for that answer, by the way. That wasn't for the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. And you all have a responsibility for that as hiring managers, as coworkers, as mentors and mentees.
Big mentorship.
Is to drive diversity so we can have, we can design products that reflect what the world looks like today.
Right. I think there's a sort of diversity fatigue in the sense that everyone's talking about it as the new shiny object, but I actually think it will make a world a better place, and will make better services and better products and better experiences if the world is represented. And because technology has now tied the world together in a very significant way, we need to have that global conversation across gender, across race, across, I would even dare to say that diversity needs to be from, the old folks like us to the younger generation.
Yes, absolutely.
And, I always think of this, I don't remember what it was called, but in Seattle, there's a nursing home, and as part of their nursing home program, they have young children. So it's this combined elderly home with young children. What's better if you have an aging parent? You know what it means to have their room lit up through an animal or through the purity and joy of a young child. And I think organizations need to bridge that gender gap, the age gap as well, because the senior people like us, we do have wisdom. We've been around the block, we've seen. And so I think diversity and inclusion is far reaching. It's not just this, mandate to make sure we have 10% additional. It needs to be more than just a simple mandate. It needs to be felt and experienced in all these different levels.
And it's simply not keeping up with the population. I mean, when you think about that 2% statistic, that's a pretty standard statistic across many creative industries. By 2040, more than half of our population will be made up of Blacks and Hispanics.
Yep.
So we're actually completely diminishing this country's ability to even work in these industries if we don't pick up the pace in terms of where the population is going. So I think to your point earlier, Judy, about it's good that at least their clients talking about digital transformation. It's good that we're at least talking about it now. We actually have to.
There's very few companies that aren't talking about it at this point.
I mean, absolutely.
They may not know how to go about it. They may not know who they need to hire, and that's part of our work, is to facilitate that conversation and help them think through what is the real need to make a difference in the organization.
And they want, again, because companies are short-term needs, it's to make. We need to identify candidates, in community colleges that we can actually skill up and train to go into these corporations. But we also we all need to invest in the long tail. We need to invest in middle school because that's going to drive the pipeline. It's going to make it stronger.
So we need designers to be teachers.
We also need corporations.
In kindergarten.
We need corporations to invest in programs like Interact Projects so that we can build the next generation of designers.
Eric?
As a little white boy, no, I'm kidding.
I give
I'm-
her permission. to
You're
say a little-
okay. You're okay. You're okay.
I'm curious about the word design as a standalone, unqualified word, because there are plenty of things that are designed that suck.
Yeah.
So when you say think like a designer or infuse design into a company, is there really such a thing as design full stop, or do you really mean good design or design that meets a certain need or can effectively solve a certain problem?
You want to take that one, Judy?
I think design is about solving a problem. I mean, to begin with. So I think design is it's everything that you're talking about. It's the thing, but it's also the experience, and it's the thing that leads to that experience. So it's, I mean, in the classic sense, it's form and function, and that's design. And designers, as Maria said, don't need to be, quote, trained as a designer. They need to be thinking through systemic challenges, through hard problems that need to be cracked. And to me, that's design today. It's not enough. We all appreciate beauty, and beauty is important, and there's nothing better than a beautiful thing to experience. But that is the designer today wants to solve bigger problems, not at the exclusion of beauty, but with beauty towards meaning and value to the world.
So craft is going deep, but you have to be strategic, and you have to be good at understanding what the difference between good design and great design, which is magic. I always said when I was running Hot Studio, the agency, we really aspired to create like great design, and everybody can create. Not everybody. There's shitty stuff out there. So there's shit. Then there's good design, which a lot of people can do if they follow the formulas, and then great design is magic. And so craft is how you get to great design.
One question.
Yeah.
You've been talking about designers kind of solving problems. How important is that we put designers to identify the problems?
No, problem finding.
Yeah, because I think that's kind of the first step to get to the best solution.
Well,
and we usually don't do it. We don't put creative minds to identify problems, just to solve them.
I don't know about you, but if you all worked in agencies, whenever a client would come to me, they would always think that they knew the problem. And good designers know that your job is to find the real problem, to identify right? So I was like, okay, this is what the client said the problem is. We need to actually do the research and uncover what the real problem is. So I actually think part of being a good designer is being a problem finder as well as a problem solver.
Completely. Yeah.
So someone give Alfonso more problems. Or more non-problems that he can make into problems.
So I guess this is a question first for Maria, and then maybe Lauren and Judy want to add their experience. With regard to the attributes of a design thinker, design-minded thinker, the change agent, risk-taking, I think we can all perhaps find ways of becoming better at that or know where to ask that. With regard to intuition, can you offer your personal practices that help you strengthen your access to your intuition? I have mine, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, it's a good question. By the way, all those tips are in my book, Rise of the DEO. Pick it up on Amazon. So there's some tips that said how you can be kind of more intuitive.
Do you have a promo code for that, Maria?
I don't, but I could get one. But you guys could shell out like $25. So yeah. So but I could get you a promo code if you'd like, or a discount. So how to be more intuitive. That's I think there's probably exercises around that, which are being in touch with your feelings. So I would think maybe as you go across your day, maybe you can dial into this, which is take a 24-hour day and document all the micro decisions that you've made all day, and ask yourself, did I make that decision because I felt like, was there any data to support this decision or not? And then you can kind of maybe gauge whether you're the type of person who needs, before you can make any kind of decision, you need to justify everything. And then maybe there are certain things where you actually say, okay, I'm going to make decision. Here's a subset of things that I do that I feel very unconfident about. And maybe I'm going to take a leap of faith rather than ask for more data. I'm just pulling this out of my ass right now. But that might be something to do. It's very intuitive. I'm being intuitive in that answer.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think, the one thing that's very real about a designer at its core is they're emotional people. And they tap into their emotion.
Yeah.
And they can practice that over time and start to see patterns and start to put those patterns together. I refer to it as strategic intuition. I mean, that's how I think about it, is that over time you develop knowledge base that you can start to draw on and start to trust those patterns. But some people are more deeply aware of paying attention to those patterns than others. The nonlinear thinker is probably able to do that more adeptly than a linear thinker. But it's a really good question.
It's a great question.
I think Malcolm Gladwell has something to say about that. I'm not sure.
I think the more passionate you are too about what you're doing, the easier it is to tap into.
That's true.
If you're doing something with, very little passion for it, and you're just sort of, okay, I have to do that, it's harder to A, tap into your intuition, and B, even think about whether you're being intuitive or not. And then I think for me, the other thing is just listening and curiosity.
Well, a good example is Apple products, right? When Steve Jobs was making the decision on the call on the iPhone, he didn't have a whole lot of data because he was like coming up with something brand new.
Yeah.
And I really feel like when I look at a DEO like Steve Jobs, I think that he felt what felt right to him more than any kind of data that was going to justify whether this was a good idea or not. So it's
I would just like to say, though, I don't think design needs to be an exclusive club. And I think that every organization now needs that right brain and left brain in their leadership. So if you've got someone who's really, whose leanings are much more to operate from the gut, to operate from the emotion and the intuition, chances are they need to be partnered with someone who's like checks and balances. Yeah. And I think the more organizations can start to not put any discipline on a pedestal, but that we're all sort of sitting up here participating in the conversation, that's where I'd like to see design go, is that design, in the same way that we want, female diversity, it's no longer a question. Yeah. Everybody has to be at the table with different points of view.
I totally agree.
Question, I'll be finished. Or
Everyone's getting hungry.
okay, so thank you very much for being with us here today. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys are great.